If you know yourself and the opponent, you don't have to be concerned about the outcome of 100 fights. Not the adversary. For every victory obtained, you will also experience a defeat if you know neither the enemy nor yourself will succumb in every combat. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Where shall I begin? Tale from the start. You say it seems like a plan. My name is John Miller, and my wife Emily Miller and I have quite the story to tell. I recollect my earliest memories. Just kidding, but it would be an interesting start, right? Let's jump. Before I met Emily Parker, I was just 8 years old and believed girls were gross and unpleasant. So you can understand my frustration when I had to play with a girl. Her being black didn't bother me. It was the fact she was a girl that irritated me. Fortunately, I changed that viewpoint as I grew older. Our dads served in the Gulf War together and became best friends on the battlefield. After the war, they went home and married. Emily and I were born on the same day that my father gave birth to my mother and her father to her mother. Around the same time, Emily's father moved to Denver, where my father ran a construction firm. My father offered Mr. Parker a job, and they quickly became business partners. Everything was smooth sailing until Emily and I hit fourth grade and the construction company reached a hard time. So our fathers went back to what they knew and re-enlisted in. Over the years, Emily and I resided on several military bases, became the second generation's best buddies. Our parents joked that moving every few years is difficult, and you must. To avoid being bullied or ignored at each new school, we kept together and encouraged one another. Wherever we went, our friendship got even stronger once we started dating other people. To Emily, I was simply her best friend, and she was the same for me. But after my first split, we developed a tradition that follows a breakup. We'd go to the mall on Saturday for a mat, generally something violent or action-packed, like viewing a sci-fi or action. When our parents retired in 11th grade, movies let us relieve our frustrations and recharge. They began their construction business this year, and it thrived, with fresh contracts taking them to Colorado Springs and Fort Collins. They were frequently gone for weeks, but their abilities were in high demand. General contractors, always needed if they're not confined to local marketplaces. As a result, Emily and I grew closer than we were to. There were times when we almost crossed the line from closest friends to something more, but we held. It grew increasingly impossible to refuse, although we did not want to. Things came to a climax when both of us were dumped a week before our senior prom. Emily's boyfriend Mike ended things over the phone, which surprised everyone. My fiancée Jessica delivered a breakup letter to my house without a word, leaving us both dateless. For prom, thankfully the local theater was having a Chuck Norris marathon. Those old Chuck Norris flicks. Emily and I were still virgins at the time, and she was a track star. Played baseball. My buddy Greg asked about dating Emily, and I introduced them. He played first base and I played second. We were a terrific pair. Greg and Emily dated for about a year, and many, including myself, thought they would marry. After graduation, however, Greg's story took a different direction. I dumped Emily a week before prom to go with my ex-girlfriend Jessica, which wrecked not just our relationship but Emily's friendship with Greg and mine, as well as Emily's friendship with Jessica. We're all in the same cheering squad. Beautiful tangled. Yeah, a lot of anguish was caused all at once. Greg and Jessica heard us both say that the Chuck Norris movie marathon was a. Fortunately, Greg didn't get away with it, but more on that later. Emily and I ended up attending the prom together, and we had 2 tickets and were both dateless, so it seemed fitting that we danced together. Pleasure, and it felt like a slap in the face to Greg and Jessica. I can remember taking Emily up from her house, only 2 doors down from mine on prom night. She climbed the stairs in an emerald green outfit that hugged her shape perfectly, was breathless, and wondered what Greg was thinking. Mr. Parker saw my reaction, chuckled, and urged me to bring his princess back by midnight. I agreed, took Emily's hand, and we headed to the prom. She looked amazing with her hair and curls framing her beautiful face. She wore minimum makeup. I was startled by how attractive she was and just managed to tell her she looked great. Emily smiled and hugged me and said I looked handsome too, which brought me out of my daze, and we were best friends again. I managed to focus on. As we traveled to the prom, Greg and Jessica tried to put us down at every opportunity. Greg snatched my girl, and Jessica, who dumped Emily. We ignored them at first because they weren't worth our attention, but Greg eventually had to face the. Despite our efforts to stay composed, Emily nearly. She lost her cool a couple times, and I was not far behind as Greg taunted us, squeezing every bit out of Jessica, then grinning at us. We barely kept it together, even though my entire plan. Things deteriorated when everyone knew Greg snatched Jessica from me, and Emily was viewed as my second alternative. But no one realized Jessica wasn't as fantastic as she appeared. She was okay at kissing, but Emily was better. The main secret was, Greg had a reputation for smooth-talking girls and the myth of his stature, but his womanizing habits were also our secret. We chuckled at his escapades, which I didn't take seriously. I became concerned when he talked about stealing a girl. From Max Cooper 3 months before dating Emily, Max was a great person, even if we were merely acquaintances as jocks. Other athletes thought my love in comics was cool, but I had nerd pals for that, and Emily liked it. Some independent comics also frightened me because Max and Cheryl had a very public breakup, and she refused to notify anyone. Emily whispered as we slowed. I can't believe she went away a month later. Danced jerking me out of my thoughts. The coronation of the king and queen will be shortly. Don't worry, Em, I talked to. This week I also spoke with Sam and Dave, and they're spreading the news as well. I winked and whispered in her ear. I have the hottest female in my arms right now. She smiled at me, exposing all her perfect teeth. You smooth-talking devil, she chuckled and kissed me. I kissed her back. Then she pulled away and looked at me seriously. What are you planning? You'll see that before you and Greg started dating, he was a big womanizer. And when he asked me, he still is. To introduce you, he swore he was done with it. I stopped and cocked an eyebrow. Wait, what? She lowered her eyes, then looked back into mine. You didn't know that when he requested you to introduce us, he vowed to treat me well. That son of a underscore before I started, but she put a finger to my lips. Don't worry, we'll get through this. The remainder of the night went as planned. We danced, and I finally noticed Jessica's horrified face when she saw us together. Greg's smug grin instantly evaporated when he discovered. Was not broken. We kept our class and enjoyed our night after prom. We headed to a peaceful location. Emily pulled out a blanket from the back seat I always kept there, and as we got out, she spread it on the lawn. In the secluded area, I held her in my arms and unzipped her dress while she untied my tie and undid my tuxedo. We gradually undressed each other, her dress and my tuck ending up on the lawn as she took off her strapless. Her eyes saw her gorgeous breasts for the first time, and they were amazing. I took a time to observe Emily's beauty as she lay on the blanket stretched out on the lush, thick grass beside her body before moving in to kiss her lips. Have you done this before? She whispered. As our kiss parted, I responded with a mix of nerves and excitement. Just do what the guys in adult films do, she smiled, referring to the film I saw to prepare for today. I flushed and kissed her again, softly and tenderly. But first I'm going to explore you with my lips and tongue, baby, I whispered. She shook as her breath quickened. Do it, sweetheart, please. Emily was my best friend, and now something much more. I knew I wanted her for the rest of my life. Oh my God, she murmured. You like that, honey? I murmured, smiling widely. She stared into my eyes with passionate affection and grinned gleefully, pulling. She sat up and kissed me with greater intensity than I could have anticipated. I loved it, Johnny, she said, finally breaking the kiss. I bent over her and I glanced in her eyes, I love you. I've always loved you. I love you, John. I know, she replied with a smile, caressing my cheek. I know I'm prepared for. This made me a woman, Johnny, and we experienced an intimate and lovely moment together. Sat up and kissed me again, then groaned and looked at her watch. Baby, we need to get home, she whispered frantically. It's already late. And princess, we don't. We don't want you to turn into a pumpkin. I grinned as she giggled. Think your Mustang would turn into a pumpkin if this were a fairy tale? I feigned to be astonished, but it's a good. This is real life. And I've worked too hard on this car to turn into a pumpkin on prom night. I stuck out my tongue and crossed my eyes, making a stupid look. She smiled again and kissed me. Take me home, baby. Absolutely, ma'am, I responded. When I joined the Army, I practiced how to treat female officers. I enjoy, ma'am, and I believe you should address me as such. From now on, she gave me a stupid look, and I smiled and kissed her. We got ready, and I grabbed the blanket and towels and placed them in the trunk. I kept my car clean, but I would have to wash the trunk and launder the towels and blanket in the morning. I drove her home and escorted her to the door. The lights were still on, and I spotted her father waiting for her inside, as well as her mother, and instantly felt very. Don't be frightened, honey. Mom and Dad adore you. I think we need to talk to them tomorrow, she read. My thoughts, we realized we had to tell our family about our plans. Emily also selected the Army and got into the police force, and I went into the infantry. Yes, she wanted to be a cop, and I was just searching for excitement to go to the recruiting station in Los Angeles in October, so we had the whole summer to spend together. Greg was discovered naked on the beach the morning after prom, with the word dog painted on his body. Max and the men weren't happy with him, so they decided to reveal the world his true colors. Jessica was nowhere to be seen because the males took her home first, and she was too humiliated to tell anyone what happened. And when Greg urged her to report it to the police, she said she didn't know what he was. As Max subsequently explained, you got to love shallow girls. Jessica went home first, and Emily and I dealt with Greg by suitably tagging him. We laughed until we wept when Max, Sam, and Dave told how Greg tried to negotiate with them while they made. He stripped him and held him down as Max performed his best impression of an artist with a spray can. Good impression, just his best attempt. Fast forward 4 months and our plans. Emily and I couldn't get stationed together as a pair, so nothing went as planned. We decided to wait until our service ended to be married to prevent long-distance issues. We really discussed this. At the airport, after my parents drove us there, we decided to return to best buddy status during our service. No pressure. And we might see other people while apart. If we fell in love with others, we'd stay. Best friends, but not pursue a. The love relationship was difficult for both of us. We spent the entire summer together discovering what each other liked. Emily kept practicing her tactics on me, and by the time we left for training, she was really good. We promised not to tell each other about any hookups throughout our service and to be as safe as possible with anybody we slept with, meaning no intercourse without condoms. It was the closest we could get to an open relationship. Yet, no, I won't tell you who I was with during my service because we weren't together. Emily didn't tell me, but we both admitted that there were others, and we saw each other very rarely over the 4 years we took leave. Together when we could, but it wasn't frequently. We hooked up a few more times, but more on that later. We stayed in touch by email and phone, and our chats largely focused on work and if we were having fun, or so it seemed for the first 2 years. Then 9/11 happened, and we ended up in reasonably close deployments in Afghanistan, although we're still far apart. She was assigned to a non-combat zone in Kandahar, and I was pursuing Taliban with the 75th Ranger Regiment. We were brimming with patriotism and wanted to find the brain behind the attacks and put him to justice. Of course, my idea of justice involved a Bullet between the eyes, amazing marksmanship. Regrettably, I didn't get the opportunity to take the shot. Despite this, we continued to ride and phone each other, albeit not as frequently. We met a couple times while in Afghanistan and spent. We opted not to spend a few days rekindling our love because those were the happiest days of my life. When the time came to re-enlist, we wanted to get out and be together, but it was difficult. Our path and lives together were put on wait, but we were ultimately going to be together by God's grace, and we made it out. Of that war zone alive, we processed out together at Fort Jackson, went back to Los Angeles, and joined the Mile High Club that day. And it was worth it to be with Emily again, even though the airline toilet was barely big enough when we landed, both of our families greeted us, and we walked off the plane hand in hand, reunited after a few days apart. In Jackson, and on the drive home, we changed into civilian clothing after processing both sets of parents. We instantly knew we were back together. We eventually let go of each other's hands as our family hugged us, my brother included. Hugged me, recognizing that I did what he never dared to do. Hey, as much as Emily's sister joined the hugs as well. She had grown up a lot. I loathed that little brat at times, but he was still part of my family. Since we departed, she had transformed from an ungainly stick into a gorgeous woman, and I had fantasies. Contemplate taking Emily and Cassie to bed at the same time. I know I'm a dog, but not dog enough to cheat on Emily. At the very least, I am not Greg, and I will never be like him. What guy hasn't fantasized about two sisters at once? Fancies like the ones I had about Emily and Cassie are simply that fantasies a play of. In other words, that would never happen in real life. Therefore, we decided to locate jobs and use our GI money to obtain some schooling. Having a degree in a good field would ensure our future, we discovered. Despite having an apartment, part-time jobs, and settling into a rather intense pattern, we still made time for each other. We always made time for each other. I've always enjoyed computers, and I'm brilliant at them, so of course, I chose computer science as my major and obtained CompTIA certifications in network security and server. I was more than ready to join the industry. It's worth noting that these exams are some of the most difficult tests ever developed. Took the whole examinations in one day, which is not recommended. I barely passed the practical exam, but that was all right. Passed, so after gaining my first job in it, I bought an engagement ring with a half-carat diamond set in 24-karat gold. I carefully shaped it for Emily's small finger and placed it in a package. Although it maxed out my credit card, I believed I could pay it off in 6 or 7 months with my new job as a network technician. I was making decent money. Was worth it. That night when Emily returned to our place, I had wine with Marie. To clarify, I do not cook. Emily worked and had recently completed her MBA, finishing all of the requisite classes, but it did not go smoothly. In record speed, we risked burnout, but we managed to stay sane owing to one other's support. "Hello, beautiful, long day at?" I asked, holding and kissing her. She dumped her purse and bag on the table. He gently kissed me. You could argue that love just learned Justin is retiring. We'll have a new guy from out of state. She rolled her eyes. We both loved Justin. She was like a second mother to us. It saddened me as well, but I just shrugged and said, well, we can invite her to the wedding. Emily smiled and continued, I know I never did this properly when I asked you to marry me, so I'm doing it now. I got down on one knee and removed the velvet box from my pocket. Emily Marie Parker, will you marry me? I asked, opening the box. When baby Emily saw the ring, her eyes opened and her face radiated joy. Yes, she launched herself into my arms, and we fell to our knees on the floor, kissing for what felt like an hour. Before she eventually broke the kiss and I was able to slip the ring on her finger, she said, I love you, John. When we stood up, she stared at the ring in amazement and kissed me once. More, I love you too, I said, kissing my fiancée again, and we ate in quiet. gazing into each other's eyes and smiling. One of us would periodically smile, and we'd chuckle or giggle, both overflowing with anticipation. We've been unofficially engaged for nearly 4 years and living together for almost as long. Long and worked part-time while studying almost all year. Now I had a full-time job and was making good money. We were now formally engaged, and Emily was working full-time at a real estate agency as the executive assistant to the boss, Mrs. Justin Hartmister. David Hart was an advertising agent, and together they made $1 million a year after taxes now that Justin was retiring. Emily was obviously concerned when the new guy came in, but I was convinced she'd impress him just as well. So, when does Justin officially retire? I wondered as we sat on the couch. After dinner, we cuddled and enjoyed one another's company as we had since we got out of the service. Tradition of having quiet moments after supper, simply the two of us with no other worries and discussing our day in. She'll stay with us for approximately a year, Emily added, and I'll miss her, Johnny. I don't know this new person. What if he's a tough boss? I shrugged and grinned. Don't worry, dear. I'm sure he'll be just as impressed with you as Justin is transitioning from MP to executive. Assisting is a major step, and you did it with ease. Oh, darling, you have no idea how difficult it was to become someone completely different from who I was for 4 years. Lifted an eyebrow and gazed in her dark amber eyes. Oh, honestly, let's think about this Army sniper ranger. I made 2 deployments to Afghanistan as a computer geek. My stupid look crossed my eyes, and jutting out my tongue to the side, she truly blushed, recognizing what she had just said. Sorry, Johnny, you're right, she conceded. I laughed, no problems. Sweetheart, when do you want to get married? As soon as possible, baby? To be Mrs. Emily Miller at the end of the month. She grinned, and I knew. We get married, dear, ever since we were youngsters. I guess I knew. Damn, I'm so. I responded with a smile, delighted that we had finally arrived. It occurred to me at that point that we were truly soulmates. That chat led us to meet with our families to organize the wedding as soon as feasible. Our parents. I took over the planning with Emily and entirely left the males out, so we sat and drank beer while the women. We almost made it to the conclusion of the wedding planning process. Actually, we got married on July 4th since it was an anniversary, which I could never forget. I would never forget that day for the rest of my life. Emily looked gorgeous in her white wedding gown, and I donned my dress blues. I even got a fresh haircut for the occasion. I wanted to look sharp for my beautiful bride, and I did Justin. David attended the wedding and congratulated us. They then did something completely unexpected by paying for the wedding as their present to us. It was a conventional Catholic ceremony, of course. That was long and dull, and if I hadn't stood there with Emily alongside me and my friend Kevin next to me, dressed blues ready to swat me if I fell asleep, I might have just drifted off. When the priest finally announced, "You may kiss the bride," I was ready to lift Emily's veil and kiss her. After a substantial throat clearing, we broke the kiss, tenderly and thoroughly for at least 2 minutes. Priest, we both blushed and turned to smile at our friends and family. Before you assume we made any modern vows with A, we created our own vows to each other, not a bunch of rubbish or odd promises. Made sure to include renouncing all others, which was the most essential thing to both of us as we entered the church. A full commitment to each other. We left the church with the same commitment, not only in our heads but also in the shape of gold rings on our left hands, which God has united together. Let no one separate. The priest said, "Damn straight, Father Emily," and I made love every chance we got. She started working more hours. The office, and I began working additional hours at Jones and Sutton Networks. We were working 10 or 12-hour days. Sometimes, but we had one golden rule for our time together: no working on weekends. It cost us each some potential extra money to keep that pledge to each other, but we had enough to make a down payment. Payment for a house. We were able to move out of the apartment and into our own 3-bedroom ranch-style house. We had a lot of fun shopping for furniture and decorating the house right after New Year's. Okay, Emily had a lot of fun, and I basically did anything she asked. Granted, she always paid me for my efforts move furniture, so it's in good place, no trouble, excellent reward. We had some conflicts from time to time. What married couple doesn't? The majority of our disagreements were over tiny and insignificant matters, which we discussed afterward. I calmed down and discovered that the easiest way to prevent a confrontation was to reply, "Yes, honey," whenever she made a point. I also hugged her and kissed her when she was angry about something I couldn't see. This sometimes helped. Other times she was really angry, but as always, we calmed down and talked it out like normal people. We were in excellent shape married, just under a year, and as passionately in love as we were since prom, even when dating others because of distance. Relationships are awful, and we did not want to put ourselves under that burden. We were still best friends now. That we were married, we also remained close as friends, and we continue to chat about everything. I believe that many married couples don't do that. But when you know your spouse your entire life and share all of your aspirations, dreams, and anxieties with them, develops a link that deepens and intensifies. As I mentioned, we were closer to each other than to our own families. The biggest challenge at the moment was when Justin retired and a new person took over the office. The real estate business was. Emily was slowly recovering and some cuts were necessary, but because to her office management talents, she was kept. Several salespeople were let go, but Emily remained Richard's executive assistant, as Justin promised. Gave a fantastic recommendation for Emily, and Richard took it to heart. He also appeared a touch too smitten with Emily's looks, but more on that later. The trouble began roughly 4 months after Richard Jefferson took over the. Justin and David were in Tahiti on their second honeymoon, and it was the Monday before Thanksgiving. We didn't understand it at the time, but it was when everything started. We were still working long hours at our respective. We contacted each other after work, and she either cooked dinner or I grabbed. As I mentioned, I don't cook, so we performed physical exercise together 3 times a week in the morning, which also became part of our regimen. Push-ups, sit-ups, and a 2 or 3 mile run were routinely done. During one 2 mile run, Emily informed me that Richard had made an improper comment to her at work. What did he say the day before? I inquired. He said I had a great ass. She said, chuckled, "Yeah, you do have a great ass. Your ass is one of the many things I adore about you. Well, you're my hubby. You're meant to love my ass." She chuckled before becoming serious. I don't like the way Richard has looked at me recently. This sobered me up, and I looked at her intently. There was worry in her eyes, so I determined to find out more. Based on Emily's description, Richard Jefferson appeared to be a bodybuilder or football player with. He let himself go a little after 40. He was huge but had a belly and some love handles. Initially, she assessed his height to be around 63 and weight to be around 275 pounds. I felt it was terrific to have a black boss and expected it to be exciting to work with him, and it generally was. However, lately he'd been acting like he wanted to sleep with her. Don't worry, I'll do some investigation into Richard Jefferson, I promised her when we got home. Thank you, love, but something about him feels odd, she remarked, with an anxious expression. Say, can you come over and take me to lunch today? It'll give you an opportunity to meet him. Her gaze. She screamed, "Great idea, love," and threw her arms around me, putting the dread of. Got into him. Maybe that won't be necessary. I smiled back. If he respects our marriage and our love for one another, I see no harm in a little flirting, but if he decides he still wants to try with, I'll do what I have to do, because I know you will, Johnny. She kissed me again. God, I love this woman and her kisses. The morning flew fast, and when I told James, my boss, that I was going to take my wife to lunch, he was fine with it and advised me to take the rest of day off. We finally finished the project for Jensen Corp, and I'd have much more free time till the next big job 6. Months of running miles of Cat6 cable, connecting over 800 machines to Jensen's internet, and then bringing up the internal serve. Or was hard labor. Every machine was upgraded from Windows 7 to Windows 10, which required a lot. External hard drives, and the server needed to be upgraded from Windows Server 2012 to Server 2016. Here we were reaping the fruits of more free time and possibly even a trip. After 10 and 12-hour work days, I couldn't wait to tell Emily about our accomplishments, which she always enjoyed. Hearing about my employment, even though she wasn't as computer aware as I was, I arrived at the real estate firm and parked right. Now it was time for me to go in and see this big boss for myself. When I walked in, I spotted Janie at the reception. Desk, hello Janie, hello John, are you coming to pick up? She was interrupted by a loud voice. Hey. You must be Emily's husband, said Richard Jefferson, offering his hand. Sandy was also married to another guy, but why? He assumed I was Emily's husband and not S-wise. I shook his hand, doing my best to clasp his wrist with two fingers. If you grip an opponent's hand correctly, it inhibits the Roman handshake. This fact wasn't lost. Richard, and I smiled at him amiably. Actually, I'm Emily's husband, John. Must be Richard. Glad to meet you. I'm here to take Emily out to lunch. Across his face in those few seconds gave me everything I needed to know about Jefferson at that moment. Shock, most likely because I am white, followed by perplexity, which I ascribed. Why would such a lovely sister marry this guy? There was a brief moment of fury, which spoke a lot about his. The character's other emotion I saw was moderate concern when he discovered he couldn't crush my hand. I caught envy. To his credit, he recovered swiftly. Nice to meet you, John muttered, releasing my hand as if it burned him. Emily should be out shortly. Then turned on his heel and marched into his office, slamming the door behind him. I saw him through the window, pulling. He took out his phone and began dialing. He was using an Android, which gave me an idea. I smiled at Janie, sat down, and took out my BlackBerry. I launched one of my applications and located the signal I required. Copied that signal. You don't work in it without picking up some beneficial hints and programs, let alone a few dirty. That was it. Emily stepped out of her office and smiled when she spotted me, so I took. Janie, our friend, was smiling as I held her in my arms and softly kissed my wife. She and her husband Tim held the last business Christmas party before Justin retired. This year was our time. I smirked at my wife and said, I think you can take the rest of the day off as well. With Thanksgiving coming up, my wife presumably said, sounds good. I grinned as she kissed me on the lips and went a knock on Jefferson's door. Yes, this guy could be a problem, I thought as she talked to him. I sent a bit of spyware to his phone that would notify me of any incoming. I also included the possibility to intercept his outgoing and incoming text messages. Yes, it's possible, terrifying, right? I also created a new folder called Incoming Mails, and I kept note of the numbers he phoned and who called him, and every time I thought of, yes, our brief encounter flashed red flags for me. I was on high alert and knew there was an issue, and his name was Richard Jefferson. Your antagonist, Sue and Sue, knew what he was talking about. His power, which means I wanted to know everything about this man, including his likes and dislikes, marital status, and wealth. Emily returned, beaming from ear to ear, and announced that Richard offered her the rest of the day off, and we entwined our fingers while holding hands and walked out together. We went to lunch at Carl's Jr., and as we were seated there, she asked what I thought. Richard O., you mean Dick? I questioned without a smile. Yeah, I don't like him and don't trust him. His look gave him away when he came to talk to me and discovered I was your spouse. Mean Johnny, she inquired. I mean, he either feels incredibly envious or he doesn't like that I'm your husband, or both. He hit it, but his expression was an open book for a few seconds. I recounted his conduct to her. Emily nodded. So, what are we going to? I shrugged. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve to keep him under control. But until we know what he's planning, if anything, we can't do much. However, I clone his mobile phone signal and can spy on. Emily gave me your crazy look, and I simply smiled. Trust me, honey, I won't do anything unless he takes the first move. I don't want to start a fight with him, and you know I trust you. Johnny, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I know and trust you. Too. Honey, what I need to know now is how much you've told him about me. I gave her a serious expression. She considered for a moment. Yes, he knows we both served in the army. But he doesn't know what we did during our military. He knows we went to college with GI Bill money. And he knows you. Build computers. I grin. Good. If he tries to gain more information from you, just tell him that's all I can tell him. She winked and gripped my hand once more, and we completed our. After eating guacamole, bacon, burgers, fries, and shakes, we called our bosses and asked for the rest of the week off. When we arrived home, we fell into bed together, and the intense impulse overtook us again. So I kissed her. If you haven't noticed, I really enjoy making love to my wife. I managed to obtain the rest of the week off for Thanksgiving, and we spent the holiday with my family, despite my brother. We had a nice time and had some great meals. Yes, my mother can prepare turkey. On Black Friday, we had stuffing, cranberry sauce, corn, and a delicious smoked ham. I opted to skip the sales and began my operation to gather intelligence on Mr. Richard Donald Jefferson. I found some extremely useful information on him. Bing is a great thing, much more accurate than Google for locating difficult targets. Mr. Jefferson he served a 20-year-old record of assault and violence in Newark, New Jersey. His time, and had been clean since then, as best as I could determine. The specifics of the case raised further red flags for me. Beat a guy who came home and found his wife in bed with Richard. This was before Richard got married. I recall him at. I checked the real estate agency, and he didn't have a wedding ring, which raised more red flags in my mind. And he was still married to Ariel Jefferson née Gardner. His wife was exquisite. She reminded me of Garcelby. Actually, I decided to play a hunch and open a folder on my phone. I looked through the contact list, uncovered something that sent a cold sweat down my back. The name Cuck Jimmy was associated to my boss's number. What the heck does Cuck Jimmy mean? I assumed Cuck is in Cuck. Seriously, this had to be a terrible prank. I kept scrolling and saw several more numbers. I recognized the term Cuck was related to tiny nicknames for them. I decided to explore deeper and found our house number displayed. Under Hot Lisa, well, she is hot, scorching hot, but the fact that he had her name next to hot was not a good indicator. A strategy began to emerge in my thoughts as I discovered more and more things about. When Emily walked out to grab us lunch, I had more than enough to put together a scheme of action. Something horrible happened. We had to be prepared. So as soon as Emily returned with Burger King, we got down to plan our approach. Surprised to see what I had dug up on him, I traced all the numbers he had in his phone, his lawyer on rapid dial, boss's home number, and a few shady characters with records. I was gathering intelligence not only on him but also on his pals. I was aware of what needed to be done, when it would be completed, and where it would take place. December arrived quickly after Thanksgiving, and we accomplished all of our shopping by the second weekend the company party was scheduled. The 20th, giving me time to put all the pieces on the board. On the night of the party, everyone from Emily's office arrived, including Dick, and the party was a big success since we hired caterers to provide everything for 20 people in advance. One of the numbers on Dick's list was our neighbors Rob and Sue Charleston, labeled as Cuck. Bobby, we kept an eye on them as well. I wired the house with cameras and microphones, and every room transmitted to my BlackBerry on separate screens, and the data was stored on a cloud server. It was ready for action. I turned to spyware. On Dick's phone, pass all text to me for permission, and monitor and record his calls to the cloud server as. Finally, I provided a backup alternative just in case. Like I mentioned, the party was large. Success beer and eggnog ran like water, but we had numerous designated drivers to take everyone home, as well as a guest room for those without transportation. Surprisingly, no one drank too much, and by 11:30 p.m., everyone had left except Dick. Somehow I knew that after everyone else departed, he would still be around. Right, Richard, I suppose it's time for bed. I smiled, signaling for him to leave. I guess you're right, Johnny smiled back. Yes, he did dare to call me John. What a jerk. Yes, we really need to go to bed, boss, which means you need to go home. Emily giggled. No, I think we need to talk first. Sit down here, he said, coming inside. Emily's eyes widened as she spotted him seated in my chair, signaling for us to sit on the sofa. In my chair. Oh, he would pay for that. No one sits in my chair except me, yet I kept my composure and sat next to Emily, intertwining fingers with hers, and we stared at him expectantly. Minute, I responded with a shrug. But make it short, Emily, and I need to go to bed since we have things to wrap tomorrow. I'm afraid not, Jan, he answered with a sneer again. Oh, I was going to. Enjoy what was about to happen next, Richard, I said with a smile. Well, you have a wonderful wife, John replied, complimenting Emily, yet demeaning her. In his tone, yes, she is wonderful, and she is all mine. I smiled and clasped Emily's hand as she smiled. I winked at her in reply. Thank you, Mr. Jefferson. Mark already knows how wonderful I am, she chuckled. Please, sweetie, replied Dick, smiling from ear to ear. He turned to me and said, you need to step aside. You can compete with my size, and I know. You can't please this great woman, Emily chuckled, Mr. Jefferson. That is extremely very inappropriate. And let me tell you, John fulfills me more than anybody else. But I know John can't satisfy you the way I can, he stated with an indignant expression on his face. I know John satisfies me more than any other man. Emily grinned at him. Yes, this was not going as Dick had intended, or perhaps he thought it was going just as he wanted, but the final outcome would be the same. Questioned up quickly and removing his pants right there. The answer is still no, she whispered and clutched my hand, shaking her head in a gesture of refusal. This was absolutely not going according to his plan, but it was still within the confines of my plan. Dick was plainly upset and losing his composure. So you'd both better do what I say when I say it, or you'll both be out of a job, he hissed. How can you take my work, Dick? I asked with a smirk, because your boss is one of my cucks. He almost shouted at me. Oh, really? I shrugged as I said that and pulled up the relevant file in the fold on my BlackBerry. Dick's face was priceless. You asked for this, he continued, bringing out his Android. He typed a pre-written message and pushed submit, but what he sent was not what he wrote. I expected this move, honey. Emily shook her head in pity as she looked at. Just then, there was a knock on the door. I'll get it, Emily said, springing up and quickly moving to the door. Dick took the chance to smile at me. That's my team now, Wonder Brad, this tiny sister. Will be ours in a minute, and you'll get to witness us take what's ours. This is Revenge Johnny, who just showed up. Emily entered to the room, escorting a woman who looked very much like Garcelby. Hello, John. My name is Christina, and I am the wife of. I got this moron with his pants down, she added, approaching and offered her hand up to greet her, and cordially shook her hand. Nice to meet you, Christina. I believe there has been a huge misunderstanding. It appears that your husband intends to have sex with my wife tonight. Did you know about this? I asked, staring at Dick. Dick, now fully dressed, looked bewildered. Where the hell is my crew? He questioned. Terrified, they just tried to break into Chief Swenson's house. The police were alerted off by an anonymous call, so they were shortly detained. I grinned at him. Hope they don't give you in to save their hides. That would be a genuine shame. Oh God, he whispered to himself more than anyone else, recognizing that his house of cards was crashing around him. God has nothing to do with this, I said calmly. So, Mrs. Jefferson, what will happen to Dick? gazed at us with such horror in his eyes. I wondered how this confident prick could be so stupid. Well, owing to your tip this past weekend, he will be sleeping elsewhere tonight, and I am sure he will not be staying here either. Giving Dick a withering gaze, she pulled out an envelope from her coat and handed it to him. You've been served, she said with determination. Now it's time for you to leave. I smiled and pointed to the door. Dick began to walk, and I stepped back to give him room to pass. I knew what occurred next, but he didn't expect my reaction. He lunged at. When he attempted to seize my throat, I ducked and used my left knee to shatter a few of his ribs before delivering a hit too, his nose bringing tears to his eyes. I then landed a powerful punch square to his groin as he fell back clutching his fractured ribs. Awful move, Dick. I murmured calmly. Yep. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, and yes, I was riding the waves of it. As my fight or flight instinct kicked in, I began a series of punches to his. With 2 swift punches to the solar plexus, he couldn't see or breathe well, so I hit a few quick kicks to his knees, knocking him to the floor until I contacted 911 on my phone to report an angry guest who recently tried to harm my wife and myself. I assured them that I had subdued him, but he might need medical assistance, so police and an ambulance were summoned to our residence right away. After they had taken him away, I turned to Christina as Emily and held her. I'm very sorry about this, Christina. I know what it's like when your husband does something like this, but during this time of year, honey, you two gave me the Richard. Christina grinned, and we all laughed together. Merry Christmas to you, she added. Merry Christmas, Christina and Emily said, hugging their new buddy. Christmas, Christina, I added, joining the embrace. Dick was charged with indecent exposure and sexual assault, plot to commit sexual assault, and conspiracy to commit aggravated assault. His confession has already been captured on video, and I sent the recordings to the police with my best wishes. Dick's lawyer attempted to make a deal with the prosecutor. However, the prosecutor resisted, and Dick was eventually sentenced to 20 years in prison. His gang was comprised mainly of ex-con with 2 prior felonies for various offenses. Their effort to break into the police chief's house got them life terms in Folsom under the 3-strike statute, along with their good friend Dickett. It turned out that they believed Dick had set them up for some mysterious reason. Needless to say, Dick did not bid them farewell. A prison officer discovered him hanging in his cell 3 months after he arrived there. He had already been badly abused. He took his own life, but no one saw anything. How did I do it? How did I set everything up well for those who haven't figured it out? I knew my opponent. You see, anything in Sun Tzu masterpieces can be. Another excellent quotation from The Art of War is to. I called Christina and got her on my side by outlining the scenario. He wasn't, so I battled him there. Christina always suspected him of cheating, but could never acquire the evidence. Controlled their finances, and she couldn't gather together enough money to hire a private detective without him. When all was said and done, it all came down to knowing my adversary. Dick was a conceited fool who believed he knew everything and expected me to break. Why did he think that? Well, when he asked Emily about my service, she gave him incorrect information about me. Emily informed the army that I was a clerk with no combat experience. Reason not to believe her. He believed that James, my boss, in case you were curious, was not too sad that Dick went to prison and died there. And once that happened, he divorced his adulterous wife. Dick had threatened him and his children, so he wasn't an eager participant. Dick was a typical bully. He was well-educated and quite smart, but his hubris made him foolish. He felt his massive manhood was enough to make any lady go to bed with him. Unfortunately, those women focused about their needs and did not sincerely love. Emily loves me and thinks from the heart, so we celebrated a quiet Christmas that year. Emily and I finally got to enjoy our first holiday season as husband and wife. Without any distractions, we threw a small event for New Year's Eve, inviting close friends and family. Celebrate the new beginnings. The year had been hard, but we came out stronger and more loved throughout the following years. Emily and I continued to develop together. We began. Our family welcomed two beautiful children who filled our home with pleasure and laughter. Our careers blossomed. We supported each other's aims and dreams, and we never forgot the lessons we gained during our early years together. The value of trust, communication, and standing by each other no matter what. We remained faithful to our traditions. Like our Saturday matina movie outings now, with a mix of family-friendly films for the kids. We also continued to work out. Our friendship became deeper with each passing year as we maintained our health and remained active as a family. We often reminisced about our adventure and how far we had come. Our parents remained good friends and business partners, watching with joy as their children constructed a life full with love and prosperity. We frequently had family gatherings, strengthening the connections that tied us and ensuring that our children grew up in an environment of love and support. Emily and I understood that life will always have obstacles, but we were certain that we could face them together. Our story was one of tenacity, loyalty, and the unshakable tie between us. Two people who chose to stick with each other through thick and thin. So if you ever find yourself doubting remember our story. Remember that true love is built on trust, respect, and the power of friendship. Willingness to battle for each other regardless of the obstacles. And most importantly, remember that understanding yourself and your opponent can make all the difference in the world. Thank you for listening to our tale. If you appreciated this fantastic, a tale of betrayal and redemption, please like and subscribe for more amazing stories. Done in John's place. Let us know in the CIA.